Do you think you could survive in the Middle Ages just 24 hours? The truth might shock you. Forget shining knights and romantic castles. Life was mud stench and hunger. Imagine damp streets, foul smells, and church bells echoing across misty fields. Medieval life was no fairy tale. It was survival, raw and unforgiving. The first sight that greets you in the morning is not a sunbeam through a clean window, but a pale streak of light seeping between cracks in mud walls and thatched roofing. The hut is built from timber frames patched with wattle and daub, a mixture of mud straw and dung pressed together to form uneven walls. The floor is nothing more than packed earth, scattered with old straw, damp and musty from years of use. The air is heavy, thick with the odor of smoke from last night's fire, mingled with the sour stench of livestock. Shadows cling to the corners, for there are no glass windows, only wooden shutters that keep out wind but trap in darkness and smell. In this cramped and dim space, you are not alone. A family of 5 or 6 shares the same single room pressed together for warmth and survival. Parents, children, and even grandparents lie shoulder to shoulder, their snores blending with the soft grunts of animals kept inside. Privacy does not exist, and personal space is an idea centuries away. The closeness is both comforting and suffocating, a reminder that survival depends on community more than comfort. The seasons rule everything. In winter, frost creeps through the thatch and the cold gnaws at every bone despite the huddled bodies and thin blankets. In summer, the hut becomes a furnace filled with the acrid smell of sweat insects buzzing at your ears and the suffocating heat of stagnant air. Each season brings its own kind of misery, but there is no escape. This hut is both your shelter and your prison. Of course not. Every home is equally poor. A blacksmith or merchant might own a sturdier house of timber with a separate room for sleeping, perhaps even a loft for storage. A minor noble might enjoy glazed windows, clean linens, and a hearth that warms the hall. But for the vast majority of peasants, life begins each day in a single dark room of mud and straw, where the difference between rich and poor is measured in smoke warmth and how many animals sleep at your feet. The first meal of the day in the Middle Ages was never meant to delight, only to quiet hunger. On the table lay a loaf of black bread, heavy and coarse, baked from rye or barley instead of wheat. Its crust was thick, its center dense, and chewing it felt more like gnawing on wood than savoring food. Barley bread was cheaper, but carried a bitter aftertaste that clung to the tongue. Oats might be boiled into a thin porridge, but it was watery and bland, a meal that filled the belly without giving much strength. Beside the bread sat a wooden cup, filled not with water, but with weak, almost flavorless ale. In a world without clean wells or pipes, water was often polluted, carrying sickness that could spread through an entire village. Brewing beer, even at low strength, killed much of what was dangerous, making it safer than drinking from a stream. This ale was not the hearty drink of taverns, but more like a cloudy, sour liquid, mild enough that even children drank it. It was survival in liquid form, not pleasure. Yet even in breakfast, the line between peasant and noble was sharp. For the common farmer, bread, oats, and ale were the whole of it, with perhaps a scrap of cheese, if fortune was kind. For wealthier craftsmen or minor nobles, there might be wheat bread, honey butter, or even fresh meat on rare mornings. At the high tables of lords, the day began with roasted game pastries or spiced wine, luxuries unimaginable to the people in the fields. What one ate at dawn said everything about who they were in the order of society. And on days of famine, even this meager spread could vanish. when stores ran empty and harvests failed. Breakfast might be nothing more than boiled turnips in thin water. The family sat in silence, chewing slowly, knowing it was all they would eat until nightfall. Hunger gnawed deeper than the taste of any food, and survival became less about eating well and more about eating at all. When you step outside, the season decides what greets your feet. In the wet months, every lane turns into a swamp of sticky mud, swallowing your shoes and splattering your legs with filth. The smell of damp straw and manure mixes with the air, making each breath thick and heavy. In the dry summer, the same roads turn into clouds of choking dust, stirred by carts and animals coating your skin and filling your mouth with grit. No matter the season, the street was never a place of comfort. It was a constant reminder of how harsh life truly was. Around you, the village stirs awake. Peddlers wander with baskets of onions, garlic, or scraps of cloth, their voices rising to lure buyers. The wooden wheels of carts squeal and creak as they drag over uneven earth pulled by tired horses or donkeys. Somewhere in the distance, the deep clang of the church bell echoes, calling both to prayer and to labor. The sound cuts through the morning air, a reminder that faith and work were the rhythms that governed every life. But the most unpleasant sight comes from the system of waste disposal. Buckets of night soil, human waste collected overnight, are casually flung into ditches or directly onto the street. Children dodge the splash animals, wade through it, and the stench becomes part of the village itself. What you call sanitation today was then only a fantasy. Filth was as permanent as the mud. In the countryside, the filth stretched along narrow lanes lined with cottages where animals and people shared the same space. In the cities, the problem only multiplied, with crowds markets and overflowing waste turning the streets into rivers of foulness. Whether rural or urban, stepping outside in the Middle Ages meant facing a world where the very ground beneath you was your first and most constant enemy. The life of a medieval farmer was a cycle of endless toil. From sunrise to sunset, he worked the fields with wooden plows, pulled by oxen, scattering seeds by hand, and bending low to weed. Every season brought its own peril. Too much rain could drown the crops, too little could starve them. Even in good years, the harvest was never truly his, for the Lord's tax collectors claimed a heavy portion. The constant fear of famine lingered, making each day in the fields a wager against nature and authority. Inside the smithy, the blacksmith lived in fire and thunder. He stoked the forge heated iron until it glowed and struck it with hammer blows that rang through the village. His craft shaped the world, sharp knives for kitchens, horseshoes for fields, hinges for doors, and on rare days, armor or swords for men of status. Each piece demanded strength, patience, and risk. As sparks burned his arms and molten metal left scars. The blacksmith's skill gave life to tools, but the forge slowly consumed his body. For the soldier, life was equally harsh, though in different ways. Training meant endless drills with heavy wooden weapons bruises, forming long before real battle. He slept in tents pitched on wet earth, wrapped in a blanket already soaked with mud. Food was scarce, rations thin, and disease more dangerous than the enemy's blade. Many soldiers died not in heroic combat, but from dysentery infection or fevers that swept through camps like fire. Glory was promised, but misery was reality. Different lives, yet all marked by hardship, hunger, and danger. In the Middle Ages, work was not a dream to follow, but a burden to survive. The Middle Ages were haunted by diseases that struck without mercy. The plague known as the Black Death swept through towns, leaving streets lined with bodies and villages abandoned in silence. Malaria lingered in marshy lands, its fevers returning again and again until the body broke. Tuberculosis consumed people, slowly coughing blood until they wasted away. With no true medicine, each illness carried fear, and death was often closer than life itself. To fight back, people turned to what they understood superstition and folk cures. Charms hung above doors to ward off spirits, while villagers wore amulets filled with herbs against unseen forces. The local healer might grind plants into poultices, whisper prayers, or bleed a patient in hopes of restoring balance. Some believed illness was punishment from God. Others blamed demons or the evil eye. In every case, cures brought more comfort to the mind than true healing to the body. Even the smallest wound could prove fatal. A scratch from a plow, a splinter lodged too deep, or a knife cut while cooking might swell, darken, and spread infection through the blood. Without cleansing or antibiotics, the body weakened quickly, and death could follow from an injury that today would barely slow you down. The medieval market could be found in both rural villages and bustling towns, and each had its own character. In the countryside, the market was little more than a muddy square, lined with wooden stalls where farmers sold eggs, cheese, and bundles of herbs. In the towns, the streets overflowed with merchants' animals and shouting the air, filled with the smell of smoked fish and manure. Both places were loud, crowded, and often tense, where buying and selling was not a leisurely stroll, but a battle for survival. The market was not a carnival, it was chaos wrapped in necessity. Among the noise and confusion, thieves thrived. Imagine a weary traveler clutching his purse of coins only to feel a sudden tug as a hand slipped it free. By the time he shouted, the thief had vanished into the sea of bodies, leaving the victim helpless and humiliated. Such stories were common, for pickpockets knew the guards were too few and too slow to act. In a place where everyone's eyes were on the goods for sale, it was all too easy to become prey. When the sun slipped behind the hills, a medieval village changed its face entirely. The chatter of daytime quieted until only the barking of dogs broke the silence. From the woods beyond the fields came the distant howl of wolves, a sound that made every listener shiver. Families drew close inside their huts. Doors barred, for night was not a time of freedom, but of fear. The village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for dawn. Yet what terrified people most was not always what lurked in the woods. Superstitions filled the night with witches, demons, and wandering spirits believed to whisper in the wind or slip through unguarded doors. At the same time, there were real threats: bandits who roamed the roads, drunks who prowled after taverns closed, or soldiers seeking trouble. The line between imagined horror and actual danger blurred, and so the fear of both was equally real. For the stranger walking through a medieval village at night, the fear was overwhelming. Every shadow looked like a thief. Every gust of wind felt like a spirit brushing past. The crunch of footsteps on dirt was deafening in the silence, and suspicious eyes might peer from behind shutters. To walk alone in such darkness was to feel unwelcome, hunted, and utterly vulnerable. The night did not belong to the traveler, it belonged to fear. From waking in a filthy hut to chewing hard bread, trudging through muddy streets, laboring until exhaustion, and fearing the night, even a single day in the Middle Ages was relentless. Comfort was rare. Hunger was constant, and danger was everywhere, from disease to thieves to the dark itself. Looking back, would you trade your modern life for even one day there? The answer may seem obvious once you imagine the mud, the stench, and the fear that never lifted. So the next time your Wi-Fi lags, remember at least you're not drinking pond water alongside the livestock.